I never imagined my own child would leave me out in the cold. I used to believe that love inside a family was a promise you could lean on, steady and sure. For years, I built my life around that faith. When my husband died of cancer last year, the ground dropped out from under me. I told myself I still had Sophie. My daughter would be my safe place. And I kept one last card hidden in the back of my mind, something I could play if I absolutely had to, a thing I barely let myself think about. I was scared of it, but I knew if I ever used it, everything could change. Get ready, because if you're hearing this, it isn't just a story. It's the hard lesson I learned the slow, painful way. Not so long ago, I believed in unconditional love. I truly thought family meant you hold on even when the storm howls. I sold the house my husband and I had built from scratch in Cedar Park and went to Austin, where Sophie and her husband, Brandon, said I could stay for a while. When I arrived with 2 bags, Brandon barely looked up from his phone. I tried not to make waves. I stayed in the little room at the back. I cooked dinners, wiped the counters, folded towels while they were still warm, lined up the groceries on the shelf, and kept out of the way. Even so, it felt like I was a splinter under Brandon's skin. At first, it was small things you could pretend you didn't notice. An eye roll when I asked a simple question, flipping the channel the second I sat down, his shoulder brushing mine in the hall like I wasn't really there. Sophie said nothing, and when she did, she minimized it. He's stressed. Work's been rough. One night, we sat at the table, the 3 of us, plates barely touched. Brandon nursed a beer like always. The quiet pressed on my chest. Then he looked at me and said, "You know this can't keep going. You're not bringing in money. We have bills. We never agreed to support another adult." The words were so blunt I felt them in my bones. Sophie didn't argue. She didn't tell him to stop. I pushed my chair back, walked to the small room, and started packing. 2 suitcases. That was what my life had been boiled down to. I didn't cry while I folded clothes. Not then. I kept my hands moving so my heart wouldn't cave in. Outside, the cold bit straight through my coat. I sat on the curb with my bags for almost an hour and watched my breath bloom white under the streetlight. My phone battery was dead and I felt about the same. I found a cheap motel off the highway and paid cash for a week. The vending machine outside my door hummed all night like a tired lullaby. I kept the TV on low just to hear another voice. I stared at the ceiling and tried to slow my breathing. In the morning, I texted Sophie. I told her I understood. I told her I'd figure something out. I told her I loved her. No reply. That afternoon, I tried again. Nothing. Days stretched until they lost their shape. I walked into every place with a help wanted sign and filled out forms until my hand cramped. I shook hands, smiled until my cheeks hurt, and told the truth. No one wanted to hire a grieving widow in her late 50s with no recent office history. I thought about cleaning houses or babysitting. My back and knees reminded me I wasn't 25 anymore. Nights were the worst. I let the TV murmur in the corner and waited for sleep that didn't come. I kept reaching out. A simple, "I'm okay, how are you?" went unanswered. 2 weeks later, I sent a heart, then a longer message. Silence. 3 months crawled by. The room took on that motel smell I could never scrub away. Bleach, old carpet, a low hum of loneliness. I lined up my few toiletries in a neat row just to feel a little control over something. Every morning I walked the same strip of shops and asked about work as if the question were brand new. People were kind in that soft, distant way that doesn't lead anywhere. I kept going back anyway because what else could I do? The only thing I carried from the old life was a small box I'd saved when I left the house in Cedar Park. It sat on the closet shelf like a little anchor. On hard nights, I took it down and set it on the bed, lifting the lid slowly like it might break in my hands. Old photos, a locket, a dried corsage, receipts from road trips, ordinary scraps that prove you were here. Some nights I just held the leather edge and rubbed it with my thumb until my shoulder unclenched, trying to feel close to something, anything that wasn't slipping away. The memory box sat on the closet shelf like it had a pulse. I kept telling myself to leave it alone, but one late night I reached up and took it down. Under the weak motel lamp, dust rose in a soft puff. I lifted the lid and there it was, my mother's old diary. I hadn't opened it in years, maybe ever. I just held it at first, my thumb on the worn spine, listening to the hum of the air unit and my own breathing. Then I let the cover fall back. I don't know why, but something inside me shifted. For the first time in months, I felt like more than the woman who'd been pushed out. I was someone with a thread to follow. I tried to keep my days small. I washed the same mug, made the bed tight, lined up my shoes like soldiers. Some nights I cried. Most nights I didn't. Every morning I sent Sophie a short text, just letting you know I'm okay, hoping for a dot, a ding, anything. Nothing came. 2 weeks later, I sent a single heart, then a longer note. Still silence. I told myself grief makes people act strange, that maybe quiet was her way of coping, but the blank screen felt like a locked door I couldn't open. I went back to the box. It was the only thing I'd carried from Cedar Park that wasn't clothing. The leather felt smooth and tired under my palm, familiar and foreign at once. I turned on the lamp again and opened to the first pages. Neat lines in my mother's careful hand, groceries beside prayers, rent notes and doctor visits, the weather when it rained. I skimmed along until an entry near June caught me. "He came again today," she wrote. "He wishes things were different. He wishes he could stand in the open and claim what's his." I read that line twice, then a third time, as if it might rearrange itself into something safer. Another line stopped me cold. She must never know. I had to set the diary down to breathe. My mother, asking paper to keep a secret from me. On the next lines, she sounded frightened and practical at once. No divorce, no public mess, too much to lose. And then the promise that kept her upright. A trust. A letter to explain, to be delivered if the worst ever happened. If anything went wrong, his lawyer would know how to set it in motion. There was a name. Not his full name, just 3 initials in the margin, circled like a warning, HJS. But the attorney's name was written clearly, like she wanted it to outlast everything, Mr. Kaplan. Next to it, an address in Dallas and the name of a small private firm. I mouthed the letters like a child practicing a new alphabet. Part of me was certain I'd wake up and the ink would vanish, like a dream fading the second you reach for it. I didn't call. My hands wouldn't steady enough to trust my voice. I sat at the little desk, tore a sheet from the motel notepad, and wrote to Mr. Kaplan in the simplest words I could manage. I told him my name and my mother's, the dates I had, the lines from the diary, the initials, the fear. I folded the paper slowly, slid it into an envelope from the front desk, and took the long walk to the blue mailbox by the gas station. When the metal door clanged shut, I pressed my fingers to the cool paint like I could will courage into the box. I waited. I tried not to count days, but the mind keeps score. I kept going out with applications and coming back with nothing. I checked my phone more than I checked the TV remote. When it finally rang with a number I didn't know, I almost let it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was older, steady, careful. When I said my mother's full name, it caught. Just a small crack a stranger can't fake. He told me who he was. He said he'd known her, not just at a distance, but in the way memory keeps a room warm. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself believe the past might yet open a door. Dallas felt like a place I'd only seen from a car window, a city you pass on your way to somewhere else. This time, I went because a stranger's voice had cracked when he said my mother's name. The morning I left, I folded the motel blanket, tucked the diary into my bag, and told the front desk I might be gone a day or two. The sky was a pale gray that made everything look like it belonged to someone else. Mr. Kaplan's office sat in a low building with glass doors and a carpet that swallowed sound. The receptionist offered water in a paper cup and smiled like she knew something good was about to happen but wouldn't spoil it. When he came out to greet me, he looked smaller than his voice. Trim suit, careful hands, kind eyes that had seen a lot. He didn't rush. He asked if I wanted the door open or closed. I chose closed. He said my mother's full name the way a person does when he's searching for the right way to honor a memory. "She trusted me," he said. "We kept in touch for years." He rested his palm on a folder as if it could feel him there. "I didn't know how to reach you after she passed." I told him about the diary, about the entry with HJS circled and the note about a letter. He nodded, like each piece slid into a spot he'd kept ready. He opened the folder and took out an envelope that had gone a little soft with time. The return address was Sterling Energy, printed on old letterhead. He held it for a second longer than necessary and then set it between us. "This was written by Harrison James Sterling," he said. "Your mother wanted you to have it if this day ever came." I didn't trust my hands not to shake, so he asked gently if he could read it to me. I said yes. He read slowly. The letter was brief, the kind of careful writing that protects a life by leaving out everything that could burn it down. HJS wrote that he had loved a woman he could not publicly stand beside, that the choices he'd made were not excuses but facts, and that he would spend the rest of his days trying to balance a scale that never quite evens out. He wrote that he had a daughter he could not claim in the open, that he had arranged for her long-term safety through his counsel, and that Mr. Kaplan would know what to do when the time came. I listened with my eyes closed, as if hearing would be easier if I didn't have to look at anything. When Mr. Kaplan finished, he didn't speak right away. He gave me the silence to feel it. "He wrote that years ago," Mr. Kaplan said. "He also updated certain documents as circumstances changed." "Is he—" I started and couldn't find a gentle end to the question. "He's gone," Mr. Kaplan said, his voice softening. "But the documents stand." He showed me more papers, not all at once. A trust agreement with my name spelled correctly, a set of beneficiary instructions, statements and valuations I couldn't absorb in one sitting. He explained the basics first, then the other parts once my breathing slowed. "It's not complicated on your end," he said. "We'll verify identity, complete the transfer forms, and you'll have access without delay." He paused like the next sentence mattered. "It's more than $1 million. The number was so far from the motel room that my mind tried to reject it. I stared at the page until the digits blurred into little rivers. I thought of the vending machine hum and the smell of bleach, of 3 unread texts, and the silence that followed them. I thought of the streetlight outside Sophie's place and the cold curb under my thighs. Then I felt something shift, not like a door blowing open, but like the ground under me, finally putting itself back together. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "You don't have to say anything yet," he said. "Your mother didn't want you to struggle. She was proud of you even when life got complicated. She asked me to tell you that. It hit me then, the part that wasn't about money. To be seen after months of being treated like extra weight. To have someone, even a man I'd never met, tell me my mother had thought of me as more than a problem to solve." I pressed my fingertips to the edge of the desk and let myself cry without hiding it. Mr. Kaplan slid the box of tissues across the wood and looked away to give me some privacy. When I could speak again, I asked him to walk me through the steps one more time. He did, patient as a teacher. We signed what we could sign that day and put dates on the forms that still needed processing. He didn't rush me out. He asked if I had a safe place to stay and gave me a list of hotels nearby that wouldn't cost a fortune. Before I left, he offered the letter in its original envelope. "It belongs to you," he said. I carried it like a small bird, careful not to bend the paper. Outside, Dallas traffic whispered along the street. The sky had pulled itself into a cleaner blue. I found a room at a modest hotel not far from the office and set the envelope on the dresser where the light could touch it. I made tea from the little packet beside the coffee machine and stood by the window while the city moved without noticing me. I didn't rush back to Austin. I needed the space to let my heartbeat return to a normal rhythm, to prove to myself that standing up wouldn't make the floor drop out again. I took short walks and let the sun warm my hands. I read the letter twice more, then put it back in its envelope so it wouldn't turn into something I picked apart out of habit. I called no one. I didn't tell Sophie. I didn't tell Brandon. For once, I let a good thing sit with me before the world could grab at it. In the quiet of that hotel room, I made a promise I could keep. I would not spend a single dollar in fear. I would not use this to beg for a place at a table where I'd already been told I didn't belong. I would learn what I needed to learn. I would move carefully and keep my head clear. That night, I lay in the dark with the letter tucked under my palm, and I felt something I hadn't felt since before cancer, before Cedar Park and the for sale sign, before the street light and the cold curb. I felt held, not protected by a man or a promise, but anchored by the truth that my life didn't end at anyone's threshold. For the first time in a long time, I slept. I went back to Austin with the letter tucked in my bag and a steadier heartbeat than I'd had in months. I didn't go anywhere near Sophie's place. I looked up short-term rentals and found a small apartment off South Congress that smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner. It had a narrow balcony, a kitchenette, and a view of a mural I'd never noticed before, like the city had been hiding an extra color from me this whole time. I set my suitcase down, opened the blinds, and let the room know I intended to stay a while. I started with a notebook and a pen. Every morning, I made coffee in a chipped mug and wrote down what I didn't know. Words like deed, title, escrow, lien, rent roll. I went to the library and came home with stacks on real estate basics and small business law. I watched free videos and paused them to copy down phrases, then looked up the parts I didn't understand. I learned how to read a lease as if it were a map, how to see where it bends and where it holds. I learned how LLCs work in Texas, why a registered agent matters, where anonymity ends and compliance begins. I wrote out checklists and taped them inside a kitchen cabinet where I could see them every time I reached for a glass. I kept my phone on silent. If Sophie called, I didn't know what I would do, so I took the choice away. I wasn't ready to share anything, not the letter, not the money, and not the fact that I was building a life without asking permission. I told myself I'd reach out when I could do it without begging to be let back in. By the second week, the research stopped feeling like homework and started feeling like a plan. I pulled county notices and auction calendars, scanning for anything in East Austin. The city had been changing for years, new buildings pushing up beside old ones, costs tilting. One listing made me sit up. A mid-size apartment building in East Austin headed to auction over a messy foreclosure with tenants in place. I read the address twice. Then I read it again. It was the building where Sophie and Brandon lived. My hands got cold. I set the paper down and walked the length of the apartment until the carpet remembered my steps. Then I sat and read everything again with a slower mind. The notice was legitimate. The time and place were set. There were no promises in that listing, just a window and a date. I let the shock drain out and asked myself what I would do if it were any other building. The answer arrived in a steady voice: due diligence. I checked property records and confirmed the liens. I drove by twice, once in daylight to count mailboxes and see the condition of the roof line, once at dusk to watch the lights turn on one by one. I didn't park. I didn't step on the property. I stood across the street and let it be a building, not a memory. I called a title company to ask what a clean transfer would require post-auction. I spoke to a property manager about costs I wasn't seeing yet: plumbing, pest control, code compliance, the way old pipes sing when you ignore them too long. I built a spreadsheet so I couldn't lie to myself if the numbers didn't work. When the math held, I formed an LLC, ML Holdings. I chose the initials because they sat quiet on the page and didn't point at anything. I filed the paperwork online, appointed a registered agent, and opened a business bank account so the money would move in clean lines. I practiced signing the new company name until my hand found its rhythm. I picked a simple email address and wrote a basic letterhead that wouldn't embarrass me when I sent formal notices. On the morning of the auction, I put on a plain blazer and flats that wouldn't make me wobble. I ate toast even though my stomach protested. The room where they held the sale felt like every other official place. Fluorescent lights, a low hum of small talk, a clatter of pens against clipboards. I stood near the back and listened to how bids rose and fell. When the building came up, my pulse hopped, but the rest of me stayed where it needed to be. I knew my ceiling. I knew my floor. I waited through the first flurry, then raised my hand when the room got cautious. Bidding is a strange kind of conversation. No one says what they really mean. You learn to hear the breath between numbers. I stayed within the plan. No heroics, no flexing. When the gavel came down, it sounded like a door latching shut. I had won. Just like that, ML Holdings owned the building where my daughter lived with the man who had told me I didn't belong at their table. My first instinct was to cry. My second was to breathe. The third was to get to work. There were papers to sign on the spot and funds to wire. The title process felt like waiting for a storm you already saw on radar, all protocol and patience. I didn't celebrate. I bought a rotisserie chicken and a bag of salad on the way home, ate standing at the counter, and checked off the next items on the list. Once the deed recorded, I sent out a calm, professional packet to every unit. Introduction of new ownership, instructions for rent payments, a request to provide current leases for review. I set a meeting with the property manager to walk the building with a maintenance checklist in hand. I made notes about railings and parking lines and the stubborn patch of grass that might be better off as gravel. I asked for quotes. I did not cut corners. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Then I drafted the notice for Sophie and Brandon's unit. I wrote it the way any landlord would after reviewing below-market terms and a history of late payments. I kept it factual. Upon review, rent would be adjusted to current market rates, effective on the legally permitted date, with the new amount clearly stated. It came out to roughly triple what they had been paying. I read the letter 3 times to make sure there was no extra sting in the language, no petty edge that would make it about me instead of the math. I signed it with ML Holdings and sent it the same way I sent everyone else's. That night, I sat on the balcony and watched South Congress fold into evening. Cars moved like small streams. A couple laughed under the mural. Somewhere, a guitar slipped out a warm line of sound. I felt a strange mix inside me. Sadness for what had happened, resolve for what I was building, a sober kind of relief. This wasn't revenge for the sake of pain. It was structure. It was a life with walls and a roof and a lock I held in my own hand. The first wave hit like I knew it would. Questions, confusion, tight voices in the hall. The packets went out and the rent portal opened under ML Holdings, and within a day my inbox held a neat row of messages from tenants who didn't know me. I answered each note with the same steady tone. Received, reviewed, here's the date, here's the number, here's the legal citation if they asked for it. I kept the language clean and free of anything that sounded personal, because it wasn't. Even when I typed Sophie and Brandon's unit number, I stayed inside the lines I'd drawn for myself. Work kept me anchored. I scheduled a full building walkthrough with the manager and a clipboard that looked bossy enough to mean it. We checked railings, stair treads, lighting, loose outlet covers, and the cracked concrete that gathered water after a rain. I approved a pest control contract and a quarterly schedule, instead of the irregular sprays someone used to do whenever a complaint rose loud enough. I ordered brighter bulbs for the corridors, so no one had to fumble with keys in the dark. I got bids for repainting the stairwells to cover the long scuffs from moving day. The laundry room hadn't seen a true cleaning in years. We hauled out the lint nests and replaced the hoses before they could turn into a story on the evening news. None of it was glamorous. All of it mattered. Tenants reacted the way people react when money shifts under them. Some signed their renewals quickly, relieved to have a stable plan. A few sent back angry notes about greedy landlords and threatened to move, then didn't. A couple truly couldn't afford the increase and asked for shorter notice or a payment plan through the transition. Where the law allowed room, I gave it. Where it didn't, I stayed inside the lines. I told myself again and again, do it right or don't do it at all. Sophie called 3 days after the notice. I watched the screen light up with her name and let it go to voicemail. My thumb pressed flat against the counter to keep steady. When I finally listened, her voice sounded small and careful, like she was tiptoeing in her own house. "Mom," she said, then paused too long. "Can we talk? Not about money, I promise. Can we talk?" I put the phone face down and walked to the balcony. I made tea and watched South Congress move in little rivers of headlights. Her next call came that evening. Then a text. Then nothing for a day. Then another call that I ignored so hard it felt like a muscle I didn't know I had. Brandon didn't bother with soft edges. I heard about him through the manager first. A heated complaint in the office about illegal increases. followed by a demand to speak to the real owner. The manager, a woman who'd been doing this longer than most neighbors had lived there, kept her voice neutral and repeated the same sentence. Please put your concerns in writing. He wanted a name. He got ML Holdings. He wanted an address. He got the registered agents. He wanted an exception. He got the policy. Every time he pushed, he ran into the same wall: procedure. I stayed out of the way and did the work. There were invoices to approve, city forms to file, and a pile of small decisions that add up when you stack them. I ordered a tree trim so the big limbs wouldn't scrape the roof line every time the wind picked up. I had the gutters cleared. I approved a small landscaping refresh that replaced the dying shrubs with something that wouldn't need to be coddled to survive August. None of this would make anyone love me, but it would make the building safer and cleaner, and sometimes that has to be enough. Every now and then, I saw Sophie without meaning to. Once, in the parking lot when I was on the far side of the street checking the mailbox cluster, she came out with a tote and stood by her car, scanning her phone like she was searching for answers she couldn't phrase. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her face free of the bright touches she used to enjoy. She wore a sweater that had seen better days. I stepped behind the utility box until she drove away, my breath tight and my palms damp. Another time, weeks later, I saw her at the grocery store 2 neighborhoods over, comparing prices on store-brand pasta. She put back the nicer jar of sauce and chose the cheaper one. I stood 2 aisles down and read the label on a box of crackers I didn't buy. I would have given anything once to rush up and fill her cart, but I kept my promise to myself. This was not punishment. This was the world turning with the weight of choices. I had offered nothing cruel, only the same math I applied to every unit. I told myself I was building something that would outlast the hurt, structure where there had been wobble, a spine where there had been apology. Brandon kept trying to peel back the layers. He posted a note on the community board asking if anyone else had intel on the shadowy owner. He cornered the maintenance guy in the courtyard and asked who signed his checks. He called the number on the letterhead and hit the operator loop that always lands on the property manager's desk. When he filed a complaint with a made-up acronym that didn't match any city department, the manager forwarded it to me with a wry, "handled." I updated the file with dates, times, and copies of every message. I didn't take any of it personally. I didn't let it shake me either. Rent came due. Some paid on the dot through the portal. Some needed the standard grace period. Sophie and Brandon sent a partial payment and an email that stretched their hardship into a paragraph without saying much at all. The late fee applied itself because the system does what it's told. I replied with the same plain voice I'd used for everyone. Received. Remaining balance is X. Please remit by Y to avoid further action. I thought about signing my actual name, then didn't. The line between what I felt and what I was doing had to stay bright. The improvements started to show. The hallways lost their grime, the stairs felt safer underfoot, and the laundry room no longer smelled like a tired apology. A young family on the second floor sent a short note that the brighter lights helped them feel safer coming home after dark. An older tenant told the manager he appreciated that someone finally saw the gutter problem as more than just an annoyance. Those small, practical wins mattered to me more than anything Brandon could shout. They were proof that running a place well isn't about being liked. It's about being responsible. At night, the apartment off South Congress felt quiet in a way that didn't scare me anymore. I'd eat something simple, fold the day's papers into tidy stacks, and stand on the balcony until the air cooled. Sometimes I'd think about the woman I used to be, the one who would have knocked on Sophie's door and asked to be let in, who would have begged for a conversation and paid for peace with her pride. I could still feel that old urge, bright and hot. But I had a different job now. I kept going. I kept it professional. And when the phone lit up with Sophie's name again, I let the call pass and set the device face down. I don't know if there's a word for the ache of staying still when every part of you wants to run toward a person you love, but that's what I did. I stayed. I held the line I'd drawn. And in the quiet that followed, I reminded myself that love can be steady without being soft, and boundaries can be a kind of care. And no. I saw Sophie again where I didn't expect her, under the flat grocery store lights, a basket hooked over her arm, the smallest frown between her eyebrows as she read a label like it might tell her what to do next. I was halfway down the aisle when she looked up and we both froze, like the floor had tilted and we were bracing without saying it. For a second, I thought about ducking behind a display of cereal. Instead, I moved closer. "Hi," she said, and the word came out like a question. She was thinner. The sweater she wore had pilled at the sleeves. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look younger and more tired at the same time. "Hi," I said. We didn't mention the building. We didn't say Brandon's name. We stood between pasta and canned tomatoes and asked each other the kind of soft questions people use when the real ones are too sharp. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you okay? She nodded at all the wrong moments. I could see her throat work when she swallowed. "I wish we could talk somewhere that isn't this," she said, her eyes flicking to a couple arguing softly over brand names. "If you want to stop by, you can," I said, and heard my own voice try to balance on a thin wire. "Afternoons are easiest. Text first so I know to buzz you in." She nodded too fast, like I might take it back if she paused. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She didn't come for 3 days. Then, just after lunch on a quiet Thursday, the buzzer sounded, and I let her up. She stepped inside my little apartment off South Congress like it was a church where you don't know the rules. She held her tote close to her ribs and looked around with a quick, embarrassed glance, the way you check a room for something you won't admit you're looking for. "I won't stay long," she said. "You can stay as long as you need," I said, and meant it. I made tea. She sat on the couch and wound her fingers together, then unwound them, then tucked them under her thighs like she had to sit on her hands to keep still. We talked about nothing on purpose. Weather, the mural across the way, a new food truck that might already be gone by next week. Every time the conversation drifted toward money or leases, she steered us away without saying why. After a while, the air settled. She leaned back, her shoulders dropping inch by inch, like a rope being lowered. She stared at the window. Her eyes went glassy. I brought a throw blanket and draped it over her legs without making a show of it. She let her head tip to the side and closed her eyes. She slept, quick and heavy, the way you sleep when you can't let yourself rest at home. I sat in the chair and read the same paragraph in a book 7 times while I watched her breathe. When she woke, it was with a start and an apology. "I didn't mean to," she said, rubbing the marks her own fingers had left on her palm. "It's all right," I said. "You were safe." She looked at me then. Really looked. There was a question standing right behind her eyes. I didn't open the door to it. Not yet. She nodded like she'd expected that boundary. Before she left, she stood by the door and straightened her sweater and said very quietly, "Thank you for letting me be here without asking for anything." I didn't say how much I wanted to ask for everything. 2 days later, the property manager forwarded a scan of a letter left under the office door. No return address, no signature, printed in a standard font, as if that could make it sound official. It was all threat and no law, accusations of predatory increases, a warning that the community would retaliate, a promise to expose the owner and make it messy. The kind of bluster that tries to feel bigger than it is. It smelled like Brandon, his rhythm, his need to control the terms. But I had no proof. I didn't need proof to act. I made a list, because lists calm the part of me that thinks chaos can always win. I had the manager log the letter with date and time, scan and save it to the file, and report it as tenant harassment to the extent the lease allowed. I asked her to route all contact through email so nothing got lost in kitchen table conversations that change depending on who remembers what. I told her to stop accepting any walk-up meetings without an appointment and to call me if anyone raised a voice. I asked the registered agent to flag and forward anything that looked like a repeat. I installed a simple camera at my own door and added privacy film to the balcony sliders so no one could read my life from the street. I changed my phone plan to a number that wasn't tied to my name in public directories. I put a freeze on my credit just because it was time. I wrote a short note to the manager, the kind with no drama in it, reminding staff that their safety mattered, that we would follow procedure, and that we would not be bullied into breaking the law or our own policies. That evening, I forwarded a summary to Mr. Kaplan for the file. He called it what it was: noise meant to scare. If it escalates, we send a formal response, he said. Until then, we document. You're doing it right. I didn't need his approval, but I kept the email because sometimes it helps to have another adult in the room, even on paper. Sophie showed up again the next week, later in the day, with a paper bag of cookies from a bakery I hadn't tried. She set them on the counter like an offering. Her face was paler. She looked like she'd taught herself not to take up much space. We ate one each, standing, because neither of us knew how to sit with what came next. He went through my phone, she said finally, not naming who he was, because we didn't need the syllables. He checks my location. He says it's about trust, but it doesn't feel like trust. He asked if I'm talking to you. I told him no. Then I told him yes. Then I told him it was none of his business, and that's when She stopped, like the words hit a wall on their way out. He gets quiet in a way that makes everything in the room want to move out of his way. I took a breath and kept my own voice even. Are you safe right now? She nodded, then shrugged, the most uncertain yes I'd ever seen. He's been trying to figure out who owns the building. He thinks there's a person behind the company, obviously, and he keeps saying she, like he knows it's a woman, or wants it to be. He said the word puppet master and laughed. He keeps telling me he's going to tear the curtain down. She looked at me, waiting. Is it you? My heart knocked once, hard. I could feel how badly I wanted to say something that would make her life simpler in the moment, even if it made everything worse in the long run. I didn't lie. I also didn't satisfy the hunger in that question. I'm not going to talk about the building, I said. Not with you, not with him. That's a line I'm keeping. She closed her eyes, then opened them again. Okay, she whispered, though it didn't sound like okay felt good. We sat. The room went quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the fridge and the traffic below my balcony. I could have changed the subject. I didn't. I had put off a truth long enough. That night, I said. I didn't have to explain which night. You stood with him. I was on the curb with 2 suitcases, and you did not say my name in a way that meant stay. I need you to know I remember that the way skin remembers heat. She flinched like I'd reached out and touched a bruise. She wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the floor. I know, she said, so soft I almost didn't catch it. I know. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself you'd be fine because you've always been the one who figures things out. I chose quiet. It was easier to survive the hour if I didn't fight him. That's what I did. I'm sorry. Her voice split on the last word. I'm so sorry. I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't. The apology mattered, but it didn't backspace anything. I let the silence do the work that words can't do without lying. I love you, she said, almost defiant. That didn't stop that night. It just hid. I love you, I said back, because that part was simple and true. And I'm not here to rescue you from something you're choosing every day. I will help you if you want something different, but I won't be part of pretending this is normal. She nodded, a tiny motion that looked like it cost something to make. He's not who I thought, she said. Or maybe he is, and I just didn't want to see it. I don't know yet what I'm going to do. You don't have to decide in this room, I said. You can decide when you're ready, where the air doesn't feel like someone else owns it. Her mouth trembled, and then she smoothed it with the back of her hand like that could flatten the feeling down. If it is you, she said, circling back because people do, if it is you behind that company, I don't want to know yet. Because if I know, I'll say it out loud. And if I say it out loud, he'll take it from me and use it to break us both. So please, not yet. Not yet, I said. She stayed a little longer, not talking. It felt like the first honest thing we'd shared in a long time. 2 people sitting still with a truth neither of us could carry for the other. When she left, she paused with her hand on the doorknob and said, I miss the way we used to laugh about nothing. Me too, I said. After the door clicked shut, I stood in the kitchen and let the ache move through me without trying to outrun it. I thought about the letter under the manager's door and the way fear dresses up like power when it wants to run the show. I checked the camera by my front door and tested the buzzer and put the cookies in a tin for later. Then I sat with a pen and wrote out the same promise I'd made in Dallas, just to remind myself I wasn't going to break it out of habit. I won't lead with fear. I won't turn this into a game of scorch the earth. I will hold my line and keep my hands clean. Night came in soft and sure. The mural across the street faded into a darker shade. Headlights stitched a slow seam along the block, and somewhere down the way a guitar found its way into a simple melody. I washed the 2 mugs we'd used and set them upside down on a towel. I thought about the girl who had come to sleep on my couch like it was a shoreline. I thought about the woman she could still be if she walked herself toward the door that would open when she turned the handle. And then, because there was nothing else to do in that hour that wouldn't make things worse, I turned off the lights and let the room settle. Nah. The notice went up a week in advance. Plain paper on the board by the mailboxes, the same language we used for every building. Community meeting to review safety upgrades, maintenance schedule, and lease compliance. I chose the community room by the laundry so nobody could claim the space felt stacked in my favor. I printed agendas that listed railings, lighting, pest control, parking lines, and nothing about me. When the evening came, I wore a simple blouse and flats and brought a stack of sign-in sheets. The property manager stood to my left with her clipboard, efficient and calm, the way she gets when the air starts to buzz. Tenants filed in under the tired fluorescents, voices low. I caught sight of Sophie near the back, hands wrapped around her phone like a talisman. Brandon stood beside her, jaw tight, 1 foot braced like he was ready to argue with the floor, too. We started with the basics. I went down the list the way a person reads a recipe, deliberate, 1 item at a time. Lighting has been upgraded on the 2nd and 3rd floors. The laundry valves have been replaced. Pest control is now on a regular schedule. Railings will be reinforced next week. If you have a unit-specific concern, add it to the sheet. We'll triage and calendar the work. I walked through reminders about paying through the portal, about grace periods and late fees that are standard, not personal. The room settled into the rhythm of an ordinary meeting. Then Brandon lifted his hand without waiting to be called on and didn't ask so much as accuse. "Let's cut the show," he said, loud enough to bounce off the vending machines. "Who are you? Who's behind ML Holdings? Because what you're doing here is predatory. You parachute in, jack up rents, and hide behind a shell." I let the murmurs pass. I looked at the manager, who gave the slightest nod. I had planned this part, when to say it, how to say it, and what I would not say after. "My name is Maya," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm the owner of ML Holdings. If you have concerns about policy or practice, we'll address them. If you have personal questions, this isn't the place." It was quiet for a heartbeat, the kind of quiet you only get when a secret stands up and puts its coat on. Eyes went from me to the agenda, to the manager, and back again. Sophie's mouth parted just a little. Brandon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "So there it is," he said. "You, figures. You expect us to believe this isn't personal? You throw people out in the street." "No one has been thrown out," I said, before he could ride the word into the crowd. "Leases were reviewed and adjusted to current market rates. Notices went out with proper timelines. We're improving the property and complying with the law. That's the scope of this meeting." He stepped forward like proximity could be a weapon. The manager shifted her stance, already between him and me without making a show of it. "You think hiding behind a company makes you clean?" he said. "I want your full name and your address. I want to see you in court. I want—" "You've been given the registered agent address, as is standard," the manager said, her tone calm as a chalk line. "If you have a legal claim, file it. Right now we're discussing building operations. Please take a seat or wait outside." He laughed, a harsh sound that wanted to be bigger than it was. Of course she has someone to speak for her. Sophie moved before I did. She stepped in front of him and held up a hand without touching him, her fingers shaking. "Stop," she said. The word was small and it landed like a stone. "You're not going to talk to my mother like that." The room stilled. The truth hung there, simple as a label. A couple in the corner glanced at each other, An older tenant looked down at his agenda like he'd been waiting for it to rearrange itself into a more comfortable order. Brandon stared at Sophie like she'd switched languages mid-sentence. "So that's it," he said, the smile gone. "A setup?" "No," Sophie said, and I heard the steel she was borrowing from somewhere deeper than anger. "It's a boundary. Sit down." He didn't sit. He didn't shout either, which somehow felt worse. He turned his body toward me while still speaking to her. "This is what you want? You and your little games?" Sophie didn't back up. She didn't look away. "This is me asking you to stop," she said. "Right now." I kept my hands flat on the table so nobody could say I'd moved toward anything. "We'll continue," I said to the room, and did. I finished the agenda. I opened the floor to unit-specific maintenance issues and wrote down 3 items that had nothing to do with the rent. A dripping pipe under a kitchen sink, a door that stuck in the heat, a light in the parking lot that flickered at dusk. People want their homes to work. The rest is noise. When it ended, tenants filed out in a stream that paused and then carried on when they realized there would be no scene to watch. Some avoided my eyes, a few met them and nodded. That quick acknowledgement of a person doing a job in a place where feelings have sharp edges. Brandon left without looking back. Sophie stayed behind, the last one in the room, the hum of the vending machine filling in the space between us. "I didn't know you were going to say it out loud," she said. "I didn't either," I said, not until the moment came. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the mailer went up. "It was the right thing," she said, and then her eyes went wet. It was the right thing. We walked back to my apartment without talking. The sky over South Congress had pulled itself into that dusky color that makes everything look softer than it is. Inside, I made tea because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. She stood by the window and watched the headlights stitch the block into moving lines. "I need to tell you something," she said without turning. "That night, I hear it when I try to sleep. The scrape of your suitcase wheels, the way the door sounded when it shut. I hear it like a loop." "I know," I said, because there was no comfort in pretending not to. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand like she didn't want to erase the evidence. Just tidy it. "He's been worse since the notices. Not loud all the time. Quiet in a way that empties out a room. He says I'm disloyal if I don't agree with him, and disloyal if I do and don't say it fast enough. I keep looking for a version of him that isn't this, and I don't find it." She turned then. "I need something solid to hold on to." I went to the bedroom and came back with the box I'd carried from Cedar Park. I'd kept the diary put away like a fragile thing that works better in dim light and careful hands. I set it on the table and lifted the cover so she could see the first page in my mother's neat script. "This is your grandmother," I said. Her voice, the way she kept track of groceries and weather and feelings she couldn't say out loud anywhere else. "There's a part I want you to read. It's not about money. It's about telling the truth you're afraid will ruin everything." She sat, pulled the diary closer, and used both hands to keep the page flat. I watched her eyes move, left to right, the small tension in her mouth as the meaning arranged itself. She read the entry where my mother described loving a man she couldn't stand beside in the open, the fear that comes from building a life around someone else's terms. The promise made in the dark with a lawyer's name attached in the margin like a lifeline. Mr. Kaplan. She read the initials circled there, HJS, and the line where my mother told a future version of me that hiding isn't the same as being safe. Sophie's shoulders shook once, then twice, then stilled. She ran a fingertip under a sentence the way a person traces a map. "She was alone," she said softly, "and she built a way out in case she needed it." "She did," I said, and she left the door marked in a way I could find it when the time came. Sophie turned the page and found the letterhead tucked behind it, the one from Sterling Energy that I'd used like a touchstone when doubt got loud. She didn't take it out. She just looked at the edge of the logo and let the idea of it sit there, that someone could carry a secret and still be brave. "I keep thinking about how I learned to be quiet to keep the peace," she said, "and how quiet became a cage I built and then pretended I didn't live in." "You're not the only one who's done that," I said. She closed the diary carefully as if shutting it too fast might scramble the past. She pressed her palms to the cover and looked at me. When she spoke, her voice was steady in a way I hadn't heard since before all of this. "I'm leaving him," she said. "I don't have the plan in a neat list yet, but I'm going to leave. I can't fix him. I can only decide what I'm willing to live with, and it isn't this." I didn't rush into a hug like a movie scene that doesn't have to deal with the morning after. I nodded once. Slow. "Okay," I said. "When you're ready, we'll make the plan. Safe, legal, and clear." She let out a breath that seemed to take the shape of a person stepping over a threshold. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But it's the kind of scared that feels like standing up, not ducking down." "That's the right kind," I said. She asked to hold the diary a little longer. I said yes, on the condition that she tuck it out of sight when she wasn't reading it. She slipped it into her tote with the same care I'd used the first night I took it down from the box. We stood at the door for a long second, both of us aware that the next days would be sharp in a different way. "If he asks," she said, her hand on the knob, "I'll tell him the owner introduced herself, that's all. I won't say more." "You don't owe him anything beyond the truth you choose," I said. "That's enough." She nodded. "I'll text you tomorrow," she said, "from a place he can't see." After the door clicked shut, I stood in the quiet and stared at the shape the evening had made. The meeting, the reveal, the way Sophie's voice didn't shake when she named me. I washed the 2 cups we'd used and dried them with a dish towel that had grown thin along the edges. Outside, South Congress hummed its usual song. I thought about my mother and the way she wrote down what she couldn't say. I thought about Sophie and the door she'd pointed herself toward. And I let myself believe, just for a moment, that some lines, once drawn, don't have to be redrawn every time someone else raises his voice. 2 days after the meeting, an email landed in the property inbox with a subject line that tried to sound official and a body that tried to sound dangerous. Brandon wrote that he knew what sterling really means, that he could connect the dots, that if I didn't reverse the increases, he would go public and make sure everyone sees what you're hiding. He CC'd a made-up tenant council and copied a reporter's general tip address like that could turn bluster into fact. He attached screenshots of my standard notices as if arrows become knives when you point them hard enough. I forwarded everything to Mr. Kaplan with a simple note, documenting. He replied within the hour and asked permission to respond on letterhead. I said yes. His email back to Brandon read like cool glass. He identified himself as counsel for ML Holdings, cited the relevant sections of the Texas Property Code, and attached a packet, copies of notices, time-stamped portal records, and the anonymous threat the manager had logged. He asked that all further communication be directed to counsel, reminded Brandon that harassment of staff or tenants wouldn't be tolerated, and warned that any defamatory statements would be met with appropriate action. No heat, no extra flourish, just the law and the line. Silence followed. Not the kind that gathers before a storm, just the air going flat when a balloon gives up pretending it's a zeppelin. Brandon didn't reply to Mr. Kaplan. He didn't push at the office window or linger by the manager's car. He stayed very busy looking like a person who had better things to do. Sophie began moving in small, steady steps. She found a therapist whose office sat over a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon. The first week, she came out of sessions with eyes that looked rinsed. She stayed off social media, turned off location sharing, and saved screenshots in a folder she labeled with the most ordinary name she could think of. She started packing in zones. Bathroom first, then the closet, then the drawer where she kept the takeout menus and coupons that make you feel like a life is under control. She told him she needed space. He called it a phase. When she told him again and carried a suitcase to her car, he followed her to the lot and leaned on the passenger door like his weight could keep her from opening it. She said his name until he stepped back. She got in. She drove to my place off South Congress with both hands on the wheel and the radio turned down low, as if the song could break the spell of habit. I buzzed her up and didn't ask questions that would make the air thinner. We stacked boxes along the wall and labeled them with a black marker, like this was any other move. She cried, then laughed, then cried again. She slept on my couch for 2 nights with the throw blanket pulled up to her chin. The third night, she found a short-term sublet with a friend from work on the north side. the kind with mismatched dishes and a view of a parking lot that glowed at midnight. It was perfect. Temporary, cheap, safe. A week later, Brandon sent one more email to the property account with a subject line full of capital letters and a body full of nothing new. Mr. Kaplan replied with the same clean tone and a formal demand to cease and desist from further harassment, enclosing the last letter and reminding him that the record would stand on its own. After that, the noise stopped. If he had an audience, it wasn't us. The building steadied. The hallways stayed bright. Work orders got fixed on schedule. If people talked about me, it didn't reach my desk. If they wondered about the story under the story, they did it while taking out their trash and returning library books and standing in line at the laundromat. Life returns to level when there's nothing left to shove. Sophie kept going to therapy. She learned how to say no without starting with, "I'm sorry." She made a list of the documents she needed, then another list of the things she didn't. She met with a legal aid clinic for a consultation about next steps that started with housing and could, if she wanted, end with papers. She ate actual meals. She sent me photos of the new coffee mug she'd picked up at a thrift store, green with a chip on the rim that gave it personality. She texted me a picture of her shoes by a door that wasn't shaped by someone else's mood and wrote, "Mine." I did the same work I'd been doing, only now without that tight coil in my chest. I met with the property manager and looked at a calendar that finally felt like progress instead of triage. Then I made a decision I hadn't admitted to myself I wanted until the wanting felt calm instead of urgent. I called a broker and asked what the market might offer for a clean, stabilized building in East Austin with good bones and a logical paper trail. We set a price that felt fair, not greedy. We listed it quietly, let qualified buyers walk through with clipboards, and accepted an offer from a small firm with a reputation for running buildings without cutting corners. Due diligence took its usual lap, and then we closed. I signed my name for ML Holdings a last time on that asset and watched the wire route itself where it needed to go. When the proceeds hit, I sat at my small kitchen table and reread the promise I'd made in Dallas. I will not spend a single dollar in fear. I pulled out another sheet of paper and made a plan that fit my life, not someone else's idea of it. Half the net went exactly where my heart had been pointing since the first night I slept without muting the world. The Allelener house, the shelter for women and children I'd read about during one of those late nights when you search for proof that safe places exist. I wrote the number, then added the zeros, then said it out loud so I couldn't soften it at the last second. The director called me herself after the transfer cleared. Her voice carried that tired kind of gratitude you hear from people who spend their days patching boats while they're still in the water. She promised me what I wanted to hear: beds, counseling, legal help, lights that stay on, locks that work. With the other half, I did something that still makes my hands shake a little when I think about it. I bought a small house in Cedar Park. Nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, a decent yard, a front window that catches morning light, and a kitchen big enough for a table where a person can drink coffee and make lists. The first time I turned the key, the air smelled like new paint and dust and possibility. I stood in the doorway long enough for a neighbor walking a dog to wave and ask if I needed a recommendation for someone to mow. I told him I'd figure it out. I meant it. I moved my few things in careful boxes and let the rooms learn me. I hung the old locket on a hook by the bedroom mirror, slid the diary into the top drawer where my hand could find it without looking, and tucked the letter back into its envelope to keep the paper from fading at the edges. I bought a second-hand table and 4 chairs, even though I only needed 2. I put a plant on the kitchen counter and promised not to apologize when it inevitably struggled through August. I took a slow drive past the lot where our old house had stood, where the for sale sign once tilted in the wind, and let the ache come and go without framing it. Then I drove home. Sophie visited a week later with a bag of groceries and a timid smile like she wasn't sure if this was a museum where she had to be careful with her hands. We cooked together, badly, laughing at how we'd both managed to forget that onions go in before the tomatoes. We stood by the sink while the pot simmered and looked out the window at a fence that needed mending. She told me about therapy, about sleep that finally showed up before 2 in the morning, about the small, satisfying pieces of a life you choose on purpose, buying your own laundry detergent, deciding what hangs on your wall, turning off a light because you are the only one who uses that room. We didn't pretend the past was neat. When the conversation drifted toward the night, I sat on the curb with 2 bags. We didn't scurry away from it. She said the words again. I'm sorry. I said mine. I love you. We let those truths stand beside each other without asking one to fix the other. That felt like the closest thing to repair I've learned. Mr. Kaplan sent a final tidy email after the sale closed, a list of what to keep and what to archive. His congratulations, modest and warm. He offered to destroy certain records unless I wanted to retain them for my files. I kept the bare minimum and let the rest go. I didn't need a cabinet full of paper to prove I had found my way through. On a soft Sunday, Sophie and I drove to the Allelener house and asked for a simple tour. Not because they owed me anything, but because I wanted to see what that number became when you turn it into light and safety. The director walked us past a playroom with crayon marks near the baseboards, a counseling office with a round table that looked like it had heard more truth than most courtrooms, and a kitchen where women in t-shirts moved around each other like they'd practiced all their lives. I didn't tell anyone who I was. When we left, Sophie squeezed my hand in the parking lot and said, "This is the first place I've been in a long time where I could hear my own thoughts." Back in Cedar Park, the house settled around me. Some afternoons, I'd sit at the little table and let sunlight climb across the wood in a bright patch that kept moving. I planted a rosemary bush, then laughed out loud when I realized it would probably thrive no matter what I did. At night, the neighborhood got quiet in a way that doesn't feel like being forgotten. I slept. I won't pretend everything is tidy. Brandon still exists in the world, and some mornings that fact brushes the edge of my day. Sophie keeps doing the work of staying true to the choice she made. I keep doing the work of not explaining my life to anyone who hasn't earned the story. I forgive slower than I thought I would, and maybe that's all right. The point isn't to erase the hurt, it's to build something stronger around the place where it changed me. When people ask how I'm doing, I tell them the truth in the smallest words I have. I'm okay. I have a table and a door and a key that lives in my own pocket. I have a daughter who knocks and doesn't flinch when I open the door. I have a past that didn't end me. Some nights I sit on the back step and listen to the crickets like they're stitching the dark together, and I think about the women who taught me what to do when the floor drops out. My mother with her careful pages, my own stubborn heart, and the girl who slept on my couch because even bravery needs a place to rest. That's not revenge. It's something better. It's a life.